Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Beyond Mirage. Today, we have with us Rohil Chitmalani, who began his journey into yoga by coming into contact with meditation many years ago. In a quest to find his true self, he visited many masters and guides from different parts of the country. Rohil has taught intensive courses in Morocco, Bali, and India. He is currently pursuing a course in cognitive science to understand various scientific bases of performing yoga. He has spent long periods of time learning and practicing Ashtang in the traditional Masur style and classical Hatha with his teachers in Masur and Rishikesh. Welcome, Rohil, to the podcast and web series of Beyond Mirage.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me here.
Amazing. So, first of all, Rohil, I would like to start with what made you choose yoga, or say, how did this journey actually started?
So I would say that this journey began in some ways right from childhood. My mother is very much into yoga as well as my father. And they used to have a teacher who would come home when I was small. At that time, I didn't really understand what yoga was about. And I was like, oh, just let me go outside and play. I don't want to do this. But every now and then they used to pull me to come and do yoga with them.
Mhm.
So, of course, like I said, at that time, I didn't understand it. And when I rediscovered it on my own, I was in college. And that was when I quickly got into it because I somehow already, having practiced it as a child, knew the breathing patterns, the movements, little bit about the alignment. So it was easy that second time for me to pick it up by myself. I remember I picked it up from a book actually, and I started to do it when I was in college. And soon after that, I started to get into meditation as well. And after finishing my bachelor's, I was quite confused about what to do with life. And I ended up thinking I'll do some work with the environment. But I think this was just something that was constantly pulling me. I constantly wanted to go deeper, keep practicing more and more. So I took a year off to go to Mysore and other places to just to immerse myself in the practice. And at that time, I didn't think I would teach. I did a teacher training program just as a, okay, I'm here for so long, so might as well just do this as well. And when I returned to Pune after that whole period, I just started to teach friends, family, relatives, and slowly that's how it began, my journey into yoga and then starting to teach yoga.
Wow. So, it was basically unplanned, but actually the dots connected and took you to the roots, basically. Right. Amazing, amazing. And in this entire journey, I'm sure you would have met various masters and teachers and you have learned from them. So, apart from yoga, what is the most valuable advice that you have got from them, or the most valuable learning that you have got from them?
So I would say there are many valuable learnings that I have received, but I would say that the most important thing is to see whether it's yoga or anything that we do as a lived experience, which means that we are trying to make it a part of our. It's not that I go and do yoga and then I come back to my life, but I want to
Mm,
make my life into that. And so I think that is the most valuable lesson I have learned through practices. Sometimes some teachers have directly told me, but also just as examples to how can I live this experience day in and day out, every single day. How can I make these practices, this more than the practices, this state of mind, state of being, into my every aspect of existence. I think that was the most valuable lesson and something I'm still trying to learn.
okay, that's nice. That's nice. And so there are various people talking about yoga in different manner. So, what is actually yoga?
So the word yoga, in Sanskrit, it means union. And different people say it is union between the soul and the divine, or union between ego and the soul, ahamkar and atman. But I think that mainly yoga is this union where basically most of us have, our mind is fractured in multiple, you can say, directions, or it's fractured into multiple pieces. So part of our mind is thinking about our past, parts of our mind are thinking, planning about the future, parts of our mind are caught up in our belief systems, our identification. We identify with certain shared beliefs which we have picked up since we were born, from maybe our family, our culture, our friends, things we read, etc. And we believe we make that a part of our identity. So people say that I am, for instance, so I might say I'm a yogi, or I'm a teacher, or you might say I'm a podcaster, or I'm an athlete. And all these shared beliefs also become part of our identity. So our identity gets wrapped around something that is not part of us. So in this way, the mind is being fractured into multiple places in the past, future. And something I also forgot to mention is it's also craving and aversion. When we are craving something, we are desiring something. Basically, we are saying that we want something that is not here in this moment right now. And so I am going into the future. I'm projecting into the future that I want this thing in the future. And this is based on my past experiences. So an example that I like to take is that I'm craving chocolate. I want chocolate after this podcast finishes, for instance. If I didn't know how chocolate tasted, I would not be craving it. So it brings me out of the present moment. In the same way, aversion is pushing away what is here and now, what I am experiencing in this present moment, whether it might be a positive emotion or a negative emotion, whatever it is I'm experiencing. So all of these things, if you see, thinking about the past, the future, craving, aversion, also our belief systems, they are all splintering our mind. So it's sort of like fracturing our mind into different parts. So yoga is this union of collecting these pieces of the mind and bringing it all into the present moment. So the union with the now, with the present moment. So this is what I think is the is one interpretation of yoga which I like to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. And majority of the time we either live in the past or we live in the future, and we are not in the now moment, but the life actually is right now. And that's really true, I would like to say. But and what happens, so taking the conversation ahead, what happens when you actually live in now? Or I would like to reiterate the question as in, how yoga will help you to transform your life completely?
So I just, before I answer this question, I want to bring in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So if you're familiar with the first Yoga Sutra, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, which basically many people have transliterated this first Yoga Sutra to mean that now I will start to give the instructions of yoga, or now the instructions of yoga will be given. So what I feel, the interpretation of this sutra from my perspective and with some teachers I have been with, is that the transmission or the practice of yoga can only be done in the now, in the presence. So in some ways, true yoga can only be practiced once we are established in the here and now, at least according to Patanjali, the Rishi Patanjali, who lived 2,500 years ago. So I feel that this is one way of looking at it, but all the practices that we do in yoga, whether it's we are doing breathing, so we are using, initially in the yoga practice, Patanjali laid out a 8-limb path,
Ashtanga.
but the first few limbs, if you look at the third limb asana, the fourth limb pranayam, we are using some anchor. So in asana, for instance, this anchor is our physical body. So we are trying to focus on our physical body as it is moving. We're trying to focus on how to keep the correct alignment of the physical body while we are practicing. We are also focusing on our breath. So we are trying not to let too many thoughts come up. We are breathing deeply, focusing on the breath. And sometimes certain asana practices also have drishti, which is the focal point. So in each asana, you're supposed to be gazing at a particular point. Sometimes it might be the tip of your thumb, or the tip of your big toe, or to the tip of your nose. So different asanas also will have drishti. Of course, this is much more difficult because a lot of people are not able to concentrate, first of all, only on the breath. So once we establish that, so all this is, we are using somewhere to ground ourselves into the present moment when we are doing asana practice. We are using the physical body along with the alignment of the physical body, the sensations, what we are feeling while we are doing the asana, and we are also using the breath. So we are using all of these together to ground, anchor ourselves into the present moment. Similarly with pranayam, we are again, focusing on the breathing, we are focusing on the sensations, how we feel. We are focusing on the kumbhak, the retention of the breath, and using only the breath in this case to anchor ourselves into the present moment. So all these practices are slowly bringing us towards coming into that present moment. Whether we practice something like karma yoga also, I may be say somebody doing work in some way. I own a business and I'm helping people, bringing goods to people that people really need, etc. And if I have that thing of a karma yogi, I'm doing this without expecting anything in return. And while I'm doing this, I am trying to be completely present in the now, not thinking of, oh, what will I get in return? Am I going to lose, gain? So I'm fully focused on that task. I'm giving it my full uh, full energy and full motivation, but at the same time, I'm not focused on the returns. So I'm established in that present moment of the action itself. So the action itself in this case for a karma yogi is what is the anchor. So similarly for in bhakti yoga, the anchor is the devotion, is the sensation, the feeling of love that you have towards the deity, towards the energy which you are invoking by doing the mantra. So in that way, all these practices are moving us towards anchoring us into the present moment. And then when Patanjali speaks about dhyan, about meditation itself, dhyan is it's actually when Patanjali speaks about it, it's more like a state of mind. It's not a practice key. I go somewhere and I sit down and I close my eyes, but it's more a state of mind that automatically dawns upon us as we do all these practices, that we should be in that state, in that now, without having to put an effort, without needing some kind of anchor. The key, I'm going to use the focus on my breath to bring me into the present moment. So at that stage, you don't even need that anchor. You can be established in the present moment.
Right. Got it. Amazing. So basically, as you said, that there are 8 steps for Ashtanga Yoga, and in the initial third or the fourth step, there are asanas and pranayams. Then comes pratyahar, dharana, dhyan, samadhi, basically. So definitely, I think that's a logical flow that you would like to say over here. So first, you focus on those things, that are proper asanas and proper pranayams. With proper practice, you are bringing your attention in the present moment, and then there will be a state of mind where you will completely live in the now, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Amazing. So what will happen then? You will, if you completely live in the now moment, what is that kind of experience, if you would like to share?
So many people have spoken about this nowadays. It's quite popular. People talk about flow state. I'm in this state where I'm flowing through things as I do my work or whatever it is I do. So I think that the most important thing is, how do we bring that state of mind into our everyday existence? So like I also said at the beginning, how do I live that yoga? So it's easier in a sense to go to an ashram and spend 2 months in silence and actually experience yoga. But it's more difficult than to come home and maybe try to get along with your in-laws, or try to get along with somebody who's troubling you, trying to also manage maybe your work, your business, your job, your family. You're trying to juggle all these things. And I think that is where it really counts, can we bring yoga into our life? So from our mat, from the ashram, from the meditation space, how can we integrate it into our every moment?
Got it. So how, now I would like to go to your personal question now, like how yoga has transformed your life.
So I think it's been a journey, and personally, I don't believe so much in kind of overnight awakening as people talk about. In one day, some people say, oh, Kundalini rises spontaneously, and then the next day you will be awakened. So I don't believe in this. I think that everything happens cumulatively. There is, even in yoga, like in other fields, like if, for instance, in the stock market, there is a compounding effect. If you do something long enough, repetitively, every single day, it will over time have big impact. So if I look on at my journey from 10 years ago to who I am now, I can see a very big difference. But when I look day to day or moment to moment, meditation to meditation, there's not so much of change. So I think that effect it compounds with time, and it's the most important thing for me has been to stick to certain habits, to establish certain habits, and just stick to those every single day. So I think some of the biggest benefits for me have been the ability to, I would not say I'm perfect at this, but sometimes when I'm facing a challenging time, the circumstances around me are changing rapidly. For me to hold on to um, my peace of mind, my center, so I have somewhere to come back to, some central point to hook myself back to, where I'm not getting lost in the emotions in the moment that is happening. So I think that is something that is still a work in progress, and something I would say yoga has given me the ability to do, is to take a step back and to see the situation as though I'm not a part of it. So all the stories that play out in our life, the stories of the relationships we have with certain people, the drama that comes from those relationships, for instance, the story of, oh, this is happening, this illness is coming to me, or this, I'm feeling tired, and oh, why do I have to do this? So I think really also the second thing that yoga has done for me is it's taken me out of victim consciousness. And I know that many people face this, is that, oh, this is the way it is for me because somebody has done bad to me, the government has done this. It's all very easy for a lot of us to blame people.
Blame
We
game.
constantly blame other people, and we don't take responsibility for our own, you can say, for everything in our life. And I think yoga teaches us this through, if we truly understand the meaning of karma, it means that we are completely responsible for every single thing that is happening in our life. And if we can take that radical responsibility, as I like to call it, some people also call it extreme ownership. You take extreme ownership of everything in your life, everything that is challenging, that has gone wrong, and you say, this is only my fault, I'm the only one to blame. And I think that can be a very powerful tool, because then we are the only ones in some ways to blame, and so we can change. We can, whatever we can change, we can try to change. Whatever we can't change, we can learn to live with it. So I think this is also something that yoga can provide us.
Okay, got it. And in between, earlier you talked about the Patanjali Sutras. Okay, so if and I have seen your page, and you had also started the series of Patanjali Sutras, and that's really amazing, I would like to say. So, if you can tell us the essence of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, that would be really great.
So the essence, in some ways, I would say, is Patanjali is really talking a lot of sutras about the mind, and how to find this union or the samadhi in the mind. And Patanjali, I would say, he, in some ways, he looks at the mind like a projector. So our mind is projecting and creating the reality that we live in. So if we start to see the mind in this way, that we are the creators through our projections, we are creating our reality. And when we start to see this, it becomes important that we are in charge of what we are creating. So I would say Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are really about understanding the mind and how we can use this mind to become well controlled, so that this mind is not leading us through life, so that our samskaras, our karma is not leading us blindly through life. The patterns that we develop in life, from the conditioning we have from our childhood, from the situations that we have faced, the difficulties, we get conditioned to behave in a certain way, to say certain things, to have certain thought patterns. So I think the Yoga Sutras are really about how we can take back this control of our mind through different practices. And once we take back control of our mind, we are the only ones who are then in control of our destiny. It doesn't matter what's written in our kundali. It doesn't matter anything. Then we are in complete control of our mind, so we can control our life. I think that is the essence.
Okay, got it. Amazing. And when you talk about the asanas and the pranayams, which are the third and the fourth step in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, it is more regarding the body. Okay, and say breath work. So, what, according to you, is our relationship with our body? So, right now, I'm just differentiating myself. I'm just going into the witness consciousness and asking that what is the relationship between us?
So I would say that the body, like there are many different views. So there are some people who view the body as it's just a vessel, it's a vehicle to carry the soul to experience this life. But I like to take a more intimate view, you can say, one that the body is, of course, is the vehicle of the soul of the Atman, but the body is also, it's the only thing that we have been given in this life, which in some ways until we die it cannot be taken away from us. So I think that it's very important. The body, uh, in a way, it will create the functions of how we feel. So different hormones will be released which will make us feel a certain way. Different things are happening constantly in the body that is making us feel the way we do, making us think the way we do, making us have emotions the way we do. So if we are, in some ways, if we forget or neglect the body, then I think it will, we cannot completely have control again over our life. If we are sick and ill all the time, we cannot think clearly, we cannot have big dreams, big visions, whatever we want to have. So I think that when it comes to our body, we, in a lot of ways, even if you see how the asana has evolved over time, you'll see that in the last few hundred years the asana has become more vigorous compared to earlier. And if you would think about, put up our feet in the shoes of the yogis, the ancient yogis, they were climbing up and down the Himalayas. They were living on very little food, doing extreme fasting. They were drinking less water. Everything was within a limit, and so they didn't need to actually do more physical asana, because they were already walking a lot, carrying all their things, their vessel to cook, etc. And they were hardly sleeping. So their whole practice was geared towards meditation, and they didn't have any toxins in the environment. So the water they were drinking was clean water from the mountains. They were breathing clean air. Today, however, we are living in a different world. The water is polluted, our food is polluted, the air is polluted, and so to get that same prana from outside of us, if we're just sitting in one place, moving into a car, our body is going to degrade. So we need to do a more vigorous style of asana. It's that change has come, because now the asana also has to prepare us for meditation. Earlier, also asana was a preparation for meditation, but not so much preparation was needed. So that's why I think also now more and more people are focusing more on the asana aspect of yoga, because I also think it is the need of the hour, because we have to take care of our bodies more before we go into meditation.
Got it, got it. And speaking about the asanas, which are the top 5 asanas that one should do on a daily basis, no matter what? And what are the benefits of it?
So I think the top 5 asanas that we must do, I would say one is to sit in on the ground. So whether you're doing Padmasana, full lotus, you're doing Siddhasana, which is another really good posture for meditation. Both these postures require a little bit more open hips. But if we can't do it, just doing Sukhasana, normal cross-legged, is very good. Doing Virasana, where we are sitting on our heels, also is good. I would say why I emphasize this is because a lot of us have shifted now to sitting on sofas and chairs. And when we spend most of our day like that, it actually tightens certain muscles. It weakens our back muscles. So ideally, we should, at least for a few hours every day, transition to sitting on the ground. Even if we are working, maybe we can take out the side handles of our chair and sit in cross-leg position. So I would say that is one important thing, is to start sitting on the ground more, because each time we sit down and get up also, there is some exercise, some movement that is happening, which is also good. Otherwise our life becomes very sedentary. The second thing I would say is Malasana, which is the squat position, the yogi squat. Malasana is very good for the hips, and it maintains the hips as we get older. It's really good for the knees, really good for the ankles, and just in general good for circulation. You see a lot of people who start to get lot of circulation problems in their lower part of the body as they age. A lot of people have knee problems. So the squat, I think, even if it's 10-15 minutes a day, it's perfect. If you have an Indian style toilet, great. Most people don't have that anymore. So it can even be that, okay, you can tell yourself, whenever I'm going to reply to messages, whenever I'm going to reply to my WhatsApp or other messages, I'm going to sit in a squat position and do that. So I would say that is the second important thing to do. Also, squat helps to rotate the hips, so it makes your posture more straight if you do it regularly. Uh, then the third kind of asana, this is in decreasing importance. So I would say sitting on the ground is most important, then squat. Then third, I would say, is doing our back bends. So doing some form of back bends, whether it's Urdhva Dhanurasana, whether it's Dhanurasana, whether it's Setu Bandhasana or Shalabhasana. When we do back bends, what we are doing is we are starting to actually in some ways open up, detoxify our nervous system is one. And what is happening is all through the day we are slightly forward folding. I'm starting to slouch as I sit here for longer. When I have to tie my shoelaces, I'm going down, bending forward. When I pick up a pillow from the bed, I'm bending forward. I drop my pen, I'm bending forward. In our regular lifestyle, it's only bending forward. There is no back bending process. So I would say back bending is very important. It also opens up the muscles here. It's stretching the front of the body. So the stomach, the chest, and it allows actually for us to breathe more deeply, more freely. And I think, of course, the breath is another thing. It's a whole different topic, how important breathing properly is. And so it allows us to do the full diaphragmatic breathing. Otherwise, if we are hunched like this, and if we have a curved upper back, we're not able to breathe the way we are supposed to. So I would say back bending is third. Then fourth, I would put twists, especially because a lot of us nowadays eat more than we need to. And so doing some form of twisting, and this can be done even just after you wake up in bed, before you sleep in bed, doing the supine twisting. Twisting movements actually help to, they twist the entire organs. And the same way we clean our clothes, for instance, nowadays we're all cleaning it in the washing machine, but traditionally you would wring it with your hands. So that same process is happening to all the internal organs. If there is extra some toxins, it's getting released. So I think it's really important, especially as we age, to keep our metabolism and our digestion well functioning, to be doing twisting every single day. And then of course after that you have the asanas which we normally, a beginner would start to practice, which is the forward folds or hip openers. And these are also, I would say, in some ways really good for, especially for our posture, because if we have very tight hamstrings, we'll start to curve in the lower back as we sit down. We'll have a curve in the lower back, so that opening the hamstrings gives our hips that capacity to pivot so that we are more upright and straight, which also helps us in our meditation and in general in life.
Got it.
So I know I didn't mention particular asanas, but I just spoke about particular parts of the practice.
Perfect. Yeah, got it. But basically you covered everything so that we can be fit physically and mentally. So that's really great. And now I would like to ask you one question that I ask all of my guests. The question is, what is success according to you?
So it's a difficult question, I think. I think primarily success is, I feel, the capacity to, first of all, be happy in doing what you're doing, and happy not only doing what you're doing, but happy in general. So regardless of what life throws to you, gives to you, you can find that joy within yourself and you can be happy, carefree. So I think that is one definition I would have of success. And the second definition I would think is to have a dharma, to have purpose, passion, to have something which is driving you, which is making you get out of bed every day. So once we have found our passion, what it is that we love to do, and more than just what we love to do, but also our skills, and mixing those together and how we can impact the world. So I think that is when, once we find what is our the gifts we can bring to the world, how can we contribute to the world, do seva in our own way, also for, of course, something in return, but having that passion and purpose that drives us, so that we are not just simply letting life happen to us, that we are going to going somewhere to work and then, switching on the phone, scrolling through something without having a dream, something we are chasing after. So I think success is somebody who has found that passion. What is my purpose? What are the gifts I can give to the world? And is trying to do something in that capacity.
Great, great, great. And any final message that you would like to give to all the viewers and listeners out here?
So the last thing that I would say is that keep doing something and try to establish things as habits. So if you're practicing yoga, if you're practicing meditation, and you're finding it hard to do it on a regular basis, one of the key tips I would give you is, first, approach it as though you're approaching to establish a habit before expecting something in return from that practice. So what I mean by this is that, say you are trying to establish a meditation practice. You want to meditate every single day, and you have chosen that you'll do this first thing in the morning, just for an example. So now you wake up. Initially, for the first 2-3 weeks, just do it for 2 minutes, 1 minute or 2 minutes. Don't do more than that. So once you do it for 1 minute, 2 minutes, and you won't really feel anything, but you're just creating a habit. You're just starting to create a habit. So every morning you wake up, you do it for 1 minute, 2 minutes. After 3-4 weeks, what will happen is that that habit will become established. And now you will do it. Okay, now it's easy for me. I'm automatically getting up and thinking about going and sitting for meditation. I don't have to push myself towards it. At that stage, you can then start to increase the time and do 5, 10, 15 minutes, where you will actually gain some benefit from the meditation. So this is what I would always advise, is first establish a habit of doing something before trying to actually do that thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's the key to making habits that last.
Right. Perfect. Yes. Actually, you said is 100% true, because I learned this from one of my guides also, that in mathematics, 7 minus 1 is 6. But for formation of habits, 7 minus 1 is 0. So even if you miss 1 day out of the 7 days, then the entire efforts leads to 0. So keep on going for all the 7 days, and that's how the habit will form. And once the habit is formed, then it will be like, okay, I have to do it. It becomes a part of your life. So yeah, 100% that's true. And thank you so much, Rohil, for doing this podcast episode with me. Guys, I will be linking his Instagram handle, his website in the description below. Do check them out. He also runs various courses. If you would like to have a look at them, and if you would like to enroll also, you can go and enroll. I will be linking all that in description. So do check him out, guys, and a lot of learning, a lot of positive vibes, and a lot of in-depth knowledge will be on your way. That's my guarantee. Okay, thank you so much, Rohil, for doing this podcast, and I hope you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and hope our paths will cross again soon.
Definitely, 100%. See you. Bye-bye.
Okay, see you. Bye.